I put out a book. It's called Hustler Book One, and I sold about 10,000 copies of it. I think it was something like 9,800 or something like that. I sold them myself out the trunk of my car, and I sold them at $10 a book. So you can do the math on how much I made off of that. It cost me about $3 to make a book. So I sold the book all around my area, which I live in the capital region in New York, which is Albany, Schenectady, Detroit, shit like that. And matter of fact, see, I'm in downtown Troy right now.
Right.
And I sold the book out the trunk of my car. I went to Massachusetts. I went to Connecticut. I went to Atlanta. I went to Florida. I just went around the country selling the books and basically just to get my name up and sell the books. And everybody who read my book loved my book, and they really thought it was a true story. Like they was arguing with me, like, who's this book based on? Now, when I wrote this book, I wrote the book in the Feds. And what happened was I used to read like a lot of urban fiction, like Donald Goines and shit like that. So I was sitting down one day and I was just like, you know what? I'm like, I could probably write a book. So my homeboy was like, yeah, I mean, if you want to write a book, just write a book. So I sat down and I started writing a book. No lie. It took me 2 days to write the book, to write the whole book. Like
Wow.
I was sitting down writing and I was letting people read the chapters as I wrote the book. Motherfuckers start paying me to write the book. Like motherfuckers coming to me with books and stamps and shit like that. Like, yo, we need the second chapter. Like, I need to be the third. Motherfuckers were bidding on who could read the next chapter first. That's how much they love my book. And I learned that I'm a pretty good writer. Now, I'm not good at grammar and shit like that because I grew up in the hood and I failed English class. But that's the only class I failed, actually. And they were paying me to write the book. So I was like, all right, this book is probably good. So then when I came out in the streets, I had motherfuckers read my book and they was coming to me and they was like, cuz, like, I ain't read a book in 10 years, but I read your shit and that shit is fire. So I realized like maybe I should put some more books out. But at the time I was in the streets and I was making so much money doing other shit that I wasn't really concentrated on pushing the books like I should have. But now that I'm a little bit older, I think that maybe I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna put some more books out because I have three parts to this book. Like I
Right.
put out part one, but it's a trilogy. So I didn't put the other two books out. And the other two books are crazy because the second book is in Richmond, Virginia. And I've never been to Richmond, Virginia. But I sat down with a bunch of dudes that was from Richmond, Virginia, and was like, well, what's this? What's this? What's this about? And I sat with these motherfuckers for about a week. And they was telling me about their town. They was telling me about the clubs out there, the bars out there, the scenes out there, telling me everything that was going on. And I wrote a book where I got 6 chapters in Richmond, Virginia. And motherfuckers from Richmond, Virginia was asking me how long I lived in Richmond. I said, never been to Richmond. I never been there. I sat down and I talked to these people and I picked their brains and they told me all this stuff and I put it into the book. And that's the type of writer I am. Like I could write about anything at all. And I write poems. I used to do spoken word shows. They got a club in Atlanta. At the time I was in Atlanta, I was living in Conyers. And they had a club out there. It's called fuck. I cannot remember the name of it, but I had went there with Jean Grey. Jean Grey's a rapper, and she was doing a show there at the night. I had went and did a poetry show while she was there. Fuck, is it Aztec? Is it something like that? It's some weird
Uh-huh.
type of name like that, but it's in downtown Atlanta, and it was a big spoken word club, and I used to do spoken word down there. So when I first came home, I had went to the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, and I opened for the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus in the Capitol in Albany, and everybody that was there, I probably got 50 business cards from like senators and shit like that, like politicians and shit. And it was like, yo, we want you to do this, we want you to do this. And I kind of let that shit go too, because I was in the streets, like I said, and I wasn't really thinking about that. I was like, yeah, I'm a dope poet.
Ti's homies, you got to connect with them,
Yeah,
with your book.
I actually had Mac Boney personal home phone number. And I mean, I lost it over time, over, being in the streets and shit like that.
Right. Right.
But I had Mac Boney home number. Like I used to call there. and talk to his family and shit like that. That's how close I was to getting that book made into a movie. And then
Dang.
I never really got the opportunity to see that shit come into fruition because at times, like when you in the streets and you like really in the streets,
Right.
like nothing else matters.
Right.
Like you just running around. But
It's all about survival.
it ain't even survival. It's just at the time I was making so much money and doing so much bullshit
Right.
that I wasn't paying attention to the things that was good that probably could have put me in a better position. But I can still do them things. Like kind of
Right.
old, like see beard gray and shit. But I ain't that old. So
Hey, hey, Cal, let's get in your background. How are
yeah,
you raised? How are you brought up?
I'm um I'm from Albany, New York, and when I grew up, like my mother and my father had money when I was a kid. Like when I was a little kid, my father had an ice cream parlor in Voorheesville, which is like this little town outside of Albany, and we had a house and everything. And then my mother started doing speedballs, which is a mix of heroin and cocaine. And my father left her, and we was broke and everything. My father came back. I had a good father. So I had a bad mother. I'm like the opposite situation of a lot of people. Like my father came back and got me and my sister, and
Wow.
but he was poor. He didn't have
Right.
nothing. My mother lost everything doing drugs. Like fucked everything up. So we went and moved to Arbor Hill. So it was like a cultural shock. Like at 5 years old, I went to Voorheesville Middle School, which was like an all white school. It's in a nice ass neighborhood. It's like my father was the only brown motherfucker in the whole city. And then I moved to Albany and Arbor Hill, where people are getting stabbed in elementary school. So the cultural shock was insanity. So at first, I was getting bullied and shit like that because, I mean, it wasn't tough. So it came to the point where I had to get tough. So
Right.
that motherfuckers would stop fucking with me and bothering me. So I started carrying weapons and shit like that in like third grade, like because
Wow.
it was so dangerous. So I grew up on Timbrook, and Timbrook was bad. So when crack hit, I'd say like 89, 88, crack hit Albany. There's a street called Swan Street, and it's one block up from Timbrook. Swan Street was an open air drug market in the late 80s, early 90s, like on some New Jack City shit. Like they were literally selling drugs in the open. There was 400 people on one block selling drugs. Like you drive your car through, 30 people run up to your car and try to sell you drugs. That was the only store by my house. There was another store called Mr. King's that was around the corner. Now, I need some water. Now, my father was cool with Rory Holloway. I don't know if you know who Rory Holloway is. He was Mike Tyson's manager. So I met Mike probably like 30 times when I was a little kid. And it's crazy because Mike
Wow.
don't even remember me because I was a little kid.
Right.
But I remember Mike because Mike used to give me money. Mike used to buy me candy from the corner store. He used to be at next to Mr. King's. The Holloways had a store next to that. And I remember Mike had one of them dogs with a purple tongue. And I forget what they're called, like the golden colored dogs with a purple tongue.
Uh,
It,
not the retrievers.
nah, is it a Shar Pei? I don't know what it is, but
Oh, the Sharpays, and
I think
they're like
I think it is a Shar Pei. It has a purple tongue, but he used to be outside the store with the dog. And Mike was this dude that he used to pay people's electric bills, everything. And Rory Holloway brother was a doctor. He used to live downstairs from me, and I met Mike a lot. So Mike was a big influence. So I don't like when people talk bad about Mike because Mike did a lot for my community at a bad time. Like when crack hit and shit was fucked up, like Mike was in Albany paying people electric bills and paying people's rent and buying shit for people. Like Mike used to be on, I see Mike go on Clinton Ave and play dice with people and
right,
just leave the money.
right there on the corner. Yeah.
Put down $3,000, roll the dice and just walk away
Right.
and leave the money for everybody who was there. And he used to do shit like this consistently, like all the time. So Mike was a big influence. So I love Mike. But then we moved to Schenectady, which was just as bad. And Schenectady was violent as shit. I went to Mount Pleasant. I got in a lot of fights in that shit. We moved to Rensselaer, which was a little bit better. They moved back to Albany, which was just as fucking bad. So we ain't never live in a nice neighborhood. My father hurt his back, so he didn't have no money no more because my father was in the military, so he made money before. And then he worked on a railroad. He made money. Then he hurt his back. He worked for the lottery and didn't make shit. He was just basically a driver for the lottery, bringing tickets here and there. So we didn't live in poverty per se to where like we didn't have food to eat. Like I'm not gonna get that fake ass story because I didn't grow up in that.
Right.
But I grew up in the hood, and I grew up to where I didn't have a pair of Tims until I was 16 years old, and I bought them shits myself. Like I didn't have a pair of Nikes, never. Name brand clothes. Listen, my all my cousins are Puerto Rican, so I used to stay at their house, and they were older and bigger than me. So you already know what I had to wear: Paco and fucking Boss, and it was bright green, bright orange. Like this is
Right.
what Puerto Ricans wore. So I'm out looking like a fucking skittle because I got all my clothes from my cousins. So
Right.
it was like it was crazy. But I grew up in a non-racist environment. My father's best friend Al was a black guy. Like all the people around him was black, but my mother's family is racist, which is crazy. So they're all racist Italians, but all the Puerto Ricans in my family, like my cousin loved black girls. My cousin Roberto, all his baby mothers are black, and he got like five of them. Like they've never, I've never heard nothing racist out my father or anybody on my father's side that I grew up in. Now my mother is married to some racist fucking Irish motherfucker from Boston.
Wow.
So at about 15, my mother come and try to take me back. Oh, I want my kids, boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, listen, I'm 15, bro. Like,
Right.
it's over for you. Like, you ain't been here my whole life. Now you want to come. So then I had an issue where I was trying to be cool with my mother because I'm an adult and I'm grown. So she never brought my son to her house. My son is half black. My baby mother is black. And she brought my sister's son to her house. And my sister's son is Puerto Rican and white. So I pressed her about it. I'm like, why has my son never been to your house?
Right.
So her thing was, well, you know how my husband is. Well, how is he? Tell me exactly how he is so I can punch him in his fucking face. Like, tell me
Right.
exactly how he is. So I don't talk to my mother. I haven't spoken to my mother in years behind that shit. And it was like, oh, you know just how old people. Fuck that. I don't tolerate racism in any form. And this is my issue with the Mexicans, with the Sureños. This is my
Right.
issue. My issue is not with Mexicans. And this is what people think that I have a problem with Mexicans. I don't. I have a problem with Sureños. And my specific problem is that they're allies of Aryan Nation.
Right. Yeah. Well,
That's
they,
my
especially in the prisons, aren't they? They link up together.
yes, and that is my problem. And other than that, I don't have a problem with them. But anybody who's linked with Aryan Nation is an enemy of mine.